Is being born good, or is it a tragedy? Is creating a life an act of love, or one of violence disguised as hope?
These questions are not rhetorical. They are at the heart of a debate that cuts across the core of philosophy, ethics, and human experience. On one side, antinatalism asserts, imposed existence is a burden. It is guaranteed suffering. The unborn do not feel pain, the born do. Therefore, it is always better not to be born. On the other, defenders of existence argue, only those who are born can feel pleasure, consciousness, love, value. Suffering may be inevitable, but it does not nullify meaning. The debate is not new, but it gained momentum in the 21st century with works like Better Never to Have Been by David Benatar and Every Cradle is a Grave by Sarah Perry. Texts that do not ask for empathy, but for logic, that do not plead for hope, but coldly show that pain is inevitable, and that, being inevitable, avoiding it is an ethical gesture, but this ethic has a response. Philosophers like Thomas Nagel in Mortal Questions and David DeGrazia in Creation Ethics propose another reading, that consciousness has value in itself, and that yes, bringing someone into the world can be morally good if the conditions are fair. This video is a direct confrontation between these two visions, without an emotional veil, without escape through faith. Here, philosophy enters the ring, and each side will put forth its best argument. It is a fact. Every human being who is born will suffer, will lose, will feel pain, will die. There is no alternative path. David Benatar maintains that this alone is sufficient. Suffering matters more than pleasure, and pleasure, when absent, is not bad, but suffering, even if brief, is always bad. Therefore, birth is never justified. Sarah Perry expands on this. The very structure of life is hostile, biologically ruthless. You are born trapped by fear, pain, and degradation, only to continue reproducing. These arguments do not arise from resentment. They arise from realistic observation. Hunger, war, abuse, illness, depression, anxiety. All of this makes up the lives of millions, if not billions, of people. Avoiding this, according to them, is not pessimism. It is responsibility. But what about the value of being alive? Thomas Nagel, in response, proposes a more subtle provocation. The value of life resides in the fact that it is conscious. Only those who exist can have experiences, good or bad. But existence, even with pain, is better than the total absence of everything. David DeGrazia moves forward. Bringing someone into the world is not Russian roulette. If the conditions are adequate and the expected quality of life is good, then creating a life can indeed be a moral act. For these authors, denying birth based on suffering is to absolutize harm, ignoring that human experience is composed of complex and unquantifiable values. Yes, pain is real, but so is love, so is pleasure, art, discovery, overcoming. Denying birth is also denying all of that. The paradox that runs through this entire debate is this. If living is so bad, why don't we accept death? If not being born is better, why do even antinatalists resist their own death? Antinatalism is based on logic, but human existence itself defies that logic. Life continues, even with pain. People reproduce, even aware of the world's cruelty, and often, despite everything, they are grateful to be alive. This video will not tell you what to think, but will rigorously show you the best arguments from both sides. The brutal logic that living is a sentence, and the complex response that life, despite everything, can still be worth it. You will hear what each philosopher has to say, and perhaps you will realize that, regardless of your answer, you are already inside the question. The first cry is the sound of pain entering. Birth non-consensually inaugurates a body that feels, a nervous system that reacts, and a life that, sooner or later, will break at some point. That is the basis of contemporary antinatalism. It is not an emotional revolt, it is an ethical thesis. For David Benatar, being born is not a right or a privilege. It is a decision made by third parties, with irreversible impact on a being who did not choose to exist. His central argument, presented in Better Never to Have Been, is known as the asymmetry of pleasure and pain. Benatar states, "The absence of suffering is good, even when no one experiences it. The absence of pleasure is not bad unless there is someone who desires it. Creating a life generates the certainty of suffering. Avoiding a life avoids that suffering. And since pleasure is not necessary for the non-existent, the conclusion, according to him, is inevitable. It is always better not to be born." This is not a theoretical philosophy. It resonates in practical, real issues. Children born in war zones, people with incurable diseases, parents who have children due to social expectation, not due to capacity for care. The antinatalist point is direct. If existence contains guaranteed suffering and was not chosen, then creating it is an ethical risk that, on principle, should be avoided. But this reasoning, although logically elegant, raises an immediate objection. Does suffering invalidate all forms of value? That is the line of tension that authors like Thomas Nagel bring. For Nagel, the discussion about being born or not cannot be limited to pain, because what is at stake is the experience as a whole. In Mortal Questions, he writes, "The evil of death lies in the loss of possible experiences. Consciousness, even with pain, is the only condition in which anything can have value." The objection to Benatar's asymmetry is not to deny suffering, but to question the conclusion drawn from it. Yes, living involves pain, but it is also the only possible space for joy, creation, learning, love, freedom, invention, consciousness. The non-existent does not suffer, but also feels nothing, neither absence, nor fullness, nor void, nor peace. And for Nagel, that absolute nothingness is not better. It simply is not. The value of life is not measured by the pain avoided, but by the possibility of what can be lived. The divergence is profound, but clear. For Benatar, the harm is objective, inevitable, and sufficient to conclude that existing is always worse than not existing. For Nagel, the value of experience, even under risk and suffering, is something that cannot be compared with non-existence, because they are distinct categories. Both use reason, both recognize suffering. The difference is in what each one does with that. The question is no longer, is there pain? This is evident. The question is this enough to say that we should never have come? And the answer does not belong to philosophy. It belongs to every consciousness that already finds itself within the world. Some will look at their own history and agree with Benatar. I didn't ask for this, and nothing compensated for it. Others, even amidst losses and scars, will intuit something different. It wasn't easy, but it was mine. Perhaps there is no universal verdict. The only certainty so far is that birth has a cost, and only those who have been born can decide if they paid too dearly. The decision to have a child is often celebrated as a gesture of love, but viewed from another angle, it may seem the opposite. Bringing someone from nothing to face an unpredictable world, where suffering is guaranteed and failure is possible. Antinatalism transforms that doubt into an accusation. For Sarah Perry, every birth is a moral gamble made on behalf of someone who cannot reject the game. In Every Cradle is a Grave, she writes, birth compels a being to participate in a game they cannot leave without dying, and in which all losses are real. The criticism here is not only against pain itself, it is against the structure of birth as a unilateral act. It is decided for another, without consent, without guarantees, with irreversible consequences. This reasoning is reinforced by practical evidence. Children born in contexts of extreme poverty, dysfunctional families without emotional, social, or material support, couples who decide to have children due to cultural pressure or desire, not due to real preparation. The argument is that the freedom to procreate has become a modern dogma, but that freedom involves another life, another mind, another destiny, and there is no way to predict what that life will encounter. Why run that risk on behalf of someone who does not yet exist? This is where antinatalism points. Avoiding birth is the only way to avoid the original injustice. On the other side, David DeGrazia responds with a distinct approach, equally rational, but less conclusive. In creation ethics, he proposes a condition for birth to be morally acceptable. If there are good reasons to believe that the created life will have, on average, positive quality, then creating it is not only permissible, it can be morally good. The issue for DeGrazia is not the risk itself, but the conditions of the risk. He acknowledges that birth involves uncertainties and, yes, a degree of suffering. But he also affirms that existence is the only channel where any experience of value can occur. Therefore, if a new being has reasonable chances of experiencing more well-being than pain, impeding that possibility is to deny something that could have value for that individual. It is an ethical, not a sentimental argument. DeGrazia does not say that every life is justifiable. He says that there are lives whose creation is justifiable under rational criteria, and that in those cases, birth is not an act of violence, it is an act of responsible trust. The debate intensifies at this point. Perry accuses, all creation is imposition. DeGrazia counters, all creation is a gamble, but some gambles are ethical, others are not. What is at stake now is no longer the value of existence itself, but the right to initiate it. Antinatalism demands certainty of absence of harm. The defense of creation accepts risk as part of the human condition and seeks rationality in the way of taking it. But what cannot be denied, and both sides recognize, is that birth is always irreversible. There is no unexisting, and no one can completely predict the journey of a life. So the question returns, with greater weight. When someone decides to bring another being into the world, are they offering an opportunity, or transferring their own faith to a body that is not their own? No philosophy can answer this for you, but you, who already exist, carry the result of someone's decision. And perhaps the only fair way to judge that act is by the marks it has left on you. If all of this makes sense to you, if thinking this way displaces you, pricks you, expands you, then perhaps you are ready for something more. For antinatalism, consciousness is not a privilege, it is a curse. The creation of a sensitive and thinking mind is the central act of injustice. Not because that mind will necessarily suffer more than it will enjoy, but because no amount of pleasure justifies having been exposed to pain. Sarah Perry points to the absurdity embedded in the basic functioning of the human mind. We think too much, we feel too much, we remember too much. Consciousness corners us between what has already hurt us and what can still hurt us. The simple fact of knowing that you will die, that everything you love is fleeting, and that every moment is a countdown, is enough, according to her, to cast doubt on the goodness of having been created. Antinatalism is not saying that living is always unbearable. It is saying that, to live, it is necessary to carry a sensitivity that can make any life unbearable at any moment. But this line of thought feeds on a logic that is, by definition, unilateral. It considers suffering an absolute argument, but pleasure a disposable exception. This is where the criticism is mounted. Thomas Nagel does not deny the depth of pain, but asks, what is the value of something that can never be lived? And how can existence be compared with non-existence if non-existence is the absolute void of any experience? This objection is not technical, it is structural. The unborn do not suffer, but also do not feel, do not desire, do not think, cannot wish they had not been created because they do not exist. Comparing existence with nothingness requires a philosophical gymnastics that takes the void as if it were a concrete alternative. But the void is not a state, it is the absence of any state. Consciousness, with all its collapses, is still the only way through which any kind of value can manifest. Without it, suffering does not matter either, because not even suffering can be perceived. Without it, there is no injustice. But there is also no justice. Antinatalism proposes turning off the battlefield. Nagel responds that without the field, there is no struggle, but there is also no victory, not even an attempt. The tension is where it has always been, in the risk. Consciousness is the risk of deep pain, but it is also the risk of truth, of creation, of real love. If you reject that risk, then you are coherent with antinatalism. But if you recognize that, even with all the weight, you have already lived something that you would not change for anything, then perhaps consciousness is not a mistake, but the only opportunity. And this is not a defense, it is only a statement. No one outside of consciousness can evaluate if it is worth it. A couple decides not to have children, not out of selfishness or lifestyle choice, but because the world is too harsh. The climate crisis is advancing. Inequality is growing, mental health is collapsing, and they think, it's better not to bring anyone into this. It seems like an ethical choice, but what does it hide? This decision, common in many parts of the world today, resonates with an antinatalist principle. Not causing suffering is more important than causing possible joys. It is a position presented as empathetic, rational, compassionate. Sarah Perry argues that this refusal of procreation is, in reality, the most responsible gesture possible. She writes, "The reasoning is direct. Not creating someone is to guarantee that someone will never feel pain. And if pain is inevitable, then not being born is the only complete protection." This ethical line leads to an uncomfortable conclusion. Every act of creation is, at minimum, an exposure to risks without consent. Therefore, avoiding birth is the only truly altruistic gesture. But this logic has a cost that is difficult to ignore. It also eliminates everything that can only exist because someone was born. The refusal of birth protects from trauma, yes, but it also impedes all possibility of resistance, beauty, rupture, creation. David DeGrazia does not try to romanticize existence. He recognizes the risks, but proposes another way of looking at this decision. For him, avoiding creation is not a neutral gesture. It is denying an opportunity that could, under adequate conditions, be meaningful. In creation ethics, he writes, not creating someone may avoid harms, yes, but it also impedes the existence of a being whose life could have value for itself and for others. The tension is here. Perry treats birth as a potential crime. DeGrazia treats it as an opportunity under condition. The difference is not in the facts. Both agree that suffering is real. The difference is in the posture towards risk. For Perry, the risk is unjustifiable. For DeGrazia, the risk can be moral, provided there is intention, care, and possibility of flourishing. What if we avoid creation only out of fear? And what if, in trying to avoid suffering, we are also interrupting futures that could have had meaning? That is the question hanging over modern choices not to procreate. It is not about defending natality, but about questioning whether not creating is always an ethical gesture, or, sometimes, just a capitulation disguised as a principle. No one who does not yet exist can ask to be brought into the world, and no one who exists can go back and undo their creation. Every decision about birth is made by someone who has already been born, never by someone who will be born. This is the point where the philosophical debate transforms into personal choice. Up to here, we have heard arguments structured on logic, ethics, statistics, subjective experiences, and moral positions. But none of them is sufficient to formulate an absolute rule. David Benatar asserts that birth is, by definition, an avoidable harm, that not creating is always the morally safe decision. His argument is clear. Even a good life contains suffering, and the unborn miss nothing. Thomas Nagel responds differently, without denying suffering, but questioning the comparison. The value of life is not something that can be measured from the outside. Only those who exist can evaluate what it means to be alive. Sarah Perry sees birth as a biological prison. David DeGrazia as an opportunity under condition. Each line of thought has its own consistency, but none of them lives your life. None carries your body, your history, your traumas, your moments of light or collapse. There is no universal answer, because no philosophical theory can predict how a life will unfold, not even yours, much less that of someone who does not yet exist. The question then returns, but now without logical support, only ethical and existential. You, with everything you have lived so far, would you say you would have preferred not to be born? And if the answer is yes, does that justify not creating another being? Or, if the answer is no, does that validate the gesture of doing the same with another body, another mind, another destiny, which may not resemble yours at all? There is no correct answer. There is only the recognition that choosing to generate a life is, above all, accepting that there is no control over what will come next. And perhaps that is precisely where the core of the issue lies. Bringing someone into the world is deciding for them that it is worth the risk, or rejecting that decision, not out of fear, but out of responsibility. Both paths carry a weight, and philosophy at this point does not solve. It only reveals the size of the choice. The decision to have or not have children, to generate or deny an existence, will never be answered in a video, book, or theory. It belongs to your experience, your history, your consciousness. And perhaps that is the most honest thing that can be said. If you made it this far, it is because this topic has touched you in some way. Perhaps in silence, perhaps out loud, perhaps because you have already wondered if being born was worth it, or if giving birth to someone someday would be. Talking about this is not easy, but ignoring it is no longer an option either. This channel exists to open space for questions that most prefer to bury, to give voice to discomfort, to doubt, to thought that does not fit into cliches. And if this video made sense to you, if it provoked you, if it made you uncomfortable, if it made you think differently, then consider going further. You can support this work in a few ways by becoming a channel member. In addition to directly helping the production of new videos with more quality and depth, you have access to early content, exclusive polls, behind-the-scenes content, and mainly, you become part of a community that thinks like you, with courage, without fear of difficult questions. Using the Super Thanks feature is a direct and specific way to show that this content had a real impact on your life. A way of saying, thank you for not running away from this subject. And of course, just by watching, commenting, liking, and sharing, you are already helping. Every view, every word, every click within here contributes to this project staying alive. That is already a lot, and it is sincere to say, thank you for that. If you feel that this content deserves to continue existing, and you can support it, any gesture makes a difference. And if you can't now, stay here, because just by thinking together, you are already part of this. This channel is about ideas, but it only exists thanks to people like you. I'll wait for you, either as a member or in our deep dive. Thank you very much for always being here. I'll see you in a future video.